I never thought something like this could happen in our quiet little town. Everyone knew everyone. We left our doors unlocked, trusted our neighbors, and thought nothing truly bad could ever happen here. I was wrong. It started with a knock at my door late one night. I hesitated before answering. Through the peephole, I saw a woman, disheveled and trembling, her face pale under the dim porch light. "Please," she whispered, "help me, he's coming." Instinct took over, and I yanked the door open, pulling her inside. She was breathing heavily, eyes darting to the dark street behind her. "Who's coming?" I asked. He took me," she stammered. "Locked me in his basement. I barely got away. Please, we have to call the police." I grabbed my phone, but before I could dial, a heavy pounding rattled the door. My stomach lurched. "Don't answer it," she hissed, gripping my arm. My mind raced. If she had escaped, that meant her captor was out there. But what if he knew she was here? The pounding came again, louder this time. Then a voice, deep, calm. "Sir, I know she's in there. Please, listen to me. She's dangerous." A chill crept up my spine. I turned to the woman, her face now unreadable. "He's lying," she whispered. "Please, you have to believe me." But something in her voice had changed. It was steadier now, too steady. My pulse pounded in my ears as I looked at her more closely. The torn clothes, the dirt smudges on her skin, they seemed too deliberate. "Sir, open the door. She isn't who she says she is," the man outside called again. My breath caught in my throat. I had to make a choice. "Tell me the truth," I said, stepping back. She smiled, not a relieved smile, not a grateful one, a knowing smile. "You already did," she whispered. Before I could react, I felt the sharp sting of something piercing my neck. My vision blurred, my knees buckled. The last thing I saw was her standing over me, that eerie smile never fading as the world went black. When I woke up, I was in the dark, bound, gagged, helpless, and I realized I wasn't the one who had let her in. She had let me in. 1983, Amsterdam. I had everything, wealth, power, and a name that resonated across the world. But even the richest man is vulnerable to those consumed by greed. 5 men watched me, studied my every move. I had no idea I was about to be dragged into a living nightmare. It was supposed to be a normal day. My driver, abductor, and I were leaving the office when suddenly, screeching tires, masked men, and a violent struggle. Before I could react, I was overpowered, thrown into a van, and whisked away. My heart pounded. This wasn't a robbery. This was something much worse. After a frightening ride, we arrived at a bicycle tunnel. I couldn't see what was happening because the kidnappers had put a helmet on me with visors taped over, but I felt the van stop. At that point, I was transferred to another car. The van blocked the way for other vehicles, buying the captors valuable extra time. We drove on again. I was taken to a hidden warehouse. Inside, they locked me in a tiny, soundproofed cell. Claustrophobic, dark, cold. The air was damp, the walls unyielding. Fear gnawed at me, the silence was deafening. Was this where I would die? I had been locked in my cell for 4 days, isolated from the outside world. The loneliness and uncertainty were unbearable. Suddenly, I heard the sound of a door opening. My heart began to beat faster, not knowing what would happen. To my surprise, I saw not only my captors, but also my faithful driver, abductor. A wave of emotions washed over me, relief that I was not alone, but also concern for Ab's fate. I realized that he had also been kidnapped, something I had not known until that moment. Communication between my captors and the outside world was almost surreal. They used letters, coded newspaper advertisements, and even tape recordings of me or my driver, abductor, speaking. These recordings were then played back over the telephone to convey instructions. It felt strange to hear my own voice when I knew it was part of a larger game. The kidnappers' demands were enormous. They wanted 35 million guilders, divided into 200,000 banknotes in Dutch, German, French, and American currency. The amount had to be carefully composed so that it was both portable and difficult to trace. The size of their demand, the equivalent of about $22 million, was staggering, even to someone with my background. I could only hope that the negotiations would go smoothly and that my family and the police would do everything they could to get us back safely. But at the same time, I knew that every step in this process was fraught with risks and uncertainties. In that tiny cell, time lost meaning. Hunger gnawed at me. sleep was impossible. I tried to reason with my captors, but they were unyielding. They had all the power, and I had nothing. I was sitting in my cell while a complicated game of cat and mouse was playing out outside. The first attempt to deliver the ransom money failed completely. My kidnappers had demanded that the money be transported in a white van with 2 red crosses, leaving from a specific location. But it went awry because the press was watching the location. The van could not leave unnoticed, which ruined the whole plan. After days of tension and uncertainty, a second attempt was made on November 28th. This time, my kidnappers had come up with an even more sophisticated plan. They demanded that the driver of the car with the ransom money be alone and not followed. I was sitting in my cell, chained up, when suddenly I heard a noise in the distance. It was different from the usual silence that had surrounded me for 3 weeks. My heart started beating faster. What was going on? Were the kidnappers back, or was this finally the moment I had been hoping for? The noise grew louder, voices, footsteps, and then a loud bang. Then the door opened, bright light streamed in, and I saw men in uniforms. It slowly dawned on me. These were not kidnappers. These were the police. I was saved. They freed me from my chains and helped me to my feet. My legs felt weak after weeks of sitting still, but I felt an enormous sense of relief. As I was led outside, I saw Abductions being freed from his cell as well. We were finally free, after 3 long weeks of fear and uncertainty. The police later told us that they had found us thanks to an anonymous tip. They had discovered a hidden door behind a double wall in the warehouse. Without that discovery, our captivity might have lasted much longer, or might have ended much worse. But at that moment, I thought of only one thing. We were alive and free. After my liberation on 30th of November 1983, I was relieved, but the impact of the kidnapping was still palpable for a long time. Although I was relatively unharmed physically, the 3 weeks of captivity had left a deep emotional impression on me. The day after our liberation, I appeared before the press in Nordwijk together with Abductions. It was a surreal moment to be back in the spotlight after weeks of isolation. In the weeks and months that followed, it became clear that a large part of the ransom had been recovered. The police discovered approximately 27 million guilders, buried in plastic barrels in a forest near Zeist. However, approximately 8 million guilders remained missing, which led to much speculation about where the money had gone. The aftermath of the kidnapping continued to haunt me for years. The trial against the kidnappers attracted a lot of media attention, and I followed the developments closely. In 1987, the main perpetrators, including Willem Hollader and Cor van Hout, were sentenced to 11 years in prison. Despite the traumatic experience, I returned to my work at the brewery. However, the kidnapping had a lasting impact on my life and that of my family. The realization that part of the ransom was never recovered remained a mystery that would occupy people's minds for a long time. My fingers skimmed over the edge of the worn page in front of me. On the other side, a rough pencil sketch of a woman with an exaggerated nose and uneven smirk stared back at me, her features hastily scribbled as if the artist had been in a rush. The shading was smudged, the lines shaky but familiar. I traced the edges of the drawing with my eyes and smiled, not because it was particularly good, but because I remembered her making it as a kid. I was supposed to be cleaning the attic, a chore my mom had been nagging me about for months. But instead, I was sifting through my old drawing books, procrastinating as usual whenever I had an unpleasant task to tackle. And I had plenty of reasons to avoid the attic. It was dim and suffocating, the single flickering bulb barely strong enough to cut through the darkness. Thick cobwebs hung in every corner, swaying slightly whenever I moved too close. The stacks of boxes, piled high like a chaotic game of Tetris, left only the narrowest paths to squeeze through. Still, I'd finally caved to my mom's demands, begrudgingly dragging myself up here to sort through the mess. I sighed, dusting off the comic's cover before tucking it back into its box. But as I did, something else caught my eye, a black leather book hidden underneath. Curious, I pulled it out, peeling away a stubborn cobweb. Embossed on the cover in faded gold lettering was a single word, photo book. I frowned. I'd seen all the family albums before, ones from my school years, vacations, birthdays, But this one? This was unfamiliar. It must have been from when I was really little. I knew I should put it back and actually get to work, but curiosity got the better of me. I flipped it open. The pages were filled with Polaroids, stacked one above the other. Judging by the washed-out colors and the way the edges curled slightly, these were old. My guess was spot on. I couldn't have been older than 4 in these pictures. I leaned closer to the dim light to examine the first one. A little boy stared back at me, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, wearing thick glasses. He had flushed cheeks and dimples, his smile awkward and uncertain, like he didn't want his picture taken. That wasn't me. I didn't panic at first. Maybe this was an old picture of my dad? He'd been blonde as a kid, though I'd never heard of him needing glasses. Maybe a cousin? Someone else in the family? Then I noticed the handwriting scrawled neatly underneath in my mother's unmistakable script. Nathan's 3rd birthday, August 12, 1994. I froze. Nathan was my name. But that wasn't my birthday. I was born on October 22nd. My chest tightened. I flipped to the next photo. Same boy, same glasses. This time, he was holding up a small soccer trophy, grinning awkwardly at the camera. Nathan's first goal, 1995. This wasn't a mistake. Something was wrong. My hands trembled as I turned the page. Another photo, another boy. This one had dark brown hair, no glasses, a slightly crooked smile. His eyes, a deep hazel, were wide and uneasy. Nathan's 5th birthday, August 12, 1996. My breath hitched. I flipped again. Another boy. This one had fiery red curls, freckles dusted across his nose. His toothy grin stretched ear to ear. Nathan's 8th birthday, March 3rd, 1998. I slammed the book shut, sucking in a shaky breath. What the hell was going on? This had to be some kind of prank. Maybe my parents had planted this up here, waiting for me to find it so they could have a good laugh. Maybe it was a collection of old, mislabeled photos. But deep down, I didn't believe that. The attic suddenly felt suffocating, the air thick and heavy in my lungs. My heart pounded against my ribs. I needed to go downstairs. I needed to ask them, demand answers. But for the first time in my life, I was afraid to face my parents. I wake up in darkness. My head throbs and my wrists burn. Something rough and tight digs into my skin. Rope. The air is damp, thick with the scent of mold and something metallic. Blood. I try to move, but my legs are bound too. Panic swells in my chest like a balloon about to burst. The last thing I remember is walking to my car after my late shift at the diner. The parking lot was nearly empty. Then, nothing. Just blackness until now. A faint creak echoes through the room. My breath catches in my throat. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. The air shifts and I sense someone near me. A whisper, low and taunting. You're finally awake. A cold hand grips my chin, tilting my head up. I can't see his face, but I feel his breath, warm and damp against my skin. I jerk away, my body trembling. Where am I? Who are you? My voice is hoarse, barely more than a whisper. Silence. Then a chuckle, deep and mocking. You don't need to know that. You only need to behave. He moves away, and I hear the scraping of metal. My heart pounds against my ribs. A knife? Chains? I thrash against my restraints, but the rope only bites deeper. My skin stings as warm liquid trickles down my wrists. A dim light flickers on, and my stomach lurches. The walls are stained, dark smears streaked across the cracked concrete. Old blood, faded handprints. I'm not the first to be here. Tears well in my eyes. No, I can't fall apart. I have to think. I have to find a way out. Please, I whisper, my voice breaking. Please let me go. He sighs, almost like I've disappointed him. Begging is useless. No one can hear you. He steps closer, and I see him now. His face is pale, his lips twisted into a grin that doesn't reach his hollow eyes. He tilts his head, watching me like a predator studying its prey. But we'll have fun, he murmurs. So much fun. The light flickers again, and the last thing I see before the darkness swallows me is the gleam of a blade. Then I wake up, again, gasping, drenched in sweat. The same darkness, the same throbbing pain, the same ropes. No, I whisper, shaking. No, no, no. The door creaks open, footsteps approach, a familiar voice chuckles. You're finally awake. It's happening all over again. The people I live with aren't my real parents. In fact, I don't think they're related to my real family at all. They're just people, cold, calculating, angry people who wanted a daughter and didn't care what it cost to get one. I've always known something was off about them. Martha, whom I'm supposed to call Mom, doesn't look like me. She doesn't think like me either. She spends her days obsessing over her delicate porcelain figurines and her immaculate collection of dresses and shoes, none of which anyone is allowed to touch. Tyler, my dad, works as an auto mechanic, always smelling like gasoline, always mumbling to himself and avoiding eye contact like he's ashamed of his own existence. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do or who I'm supposed to become when I grow up, but I've lived with them long enough to know one thing. I don't want to be like them. They treat me like I'm theirs to control. I only speak when spoken to. I wear what they tell me to wear, go where they tell me to go, and at 15, I'm never allowed to go anywhere on my own. But what makes me sick is the fact that I've put up with all of it for so long. It didn't matter that I wasn't allowed to hang out with friends. Dad just wanted to keep me safe. He knew best. It didn't matter that Mom forced me to sit on the floor for hours sewing lace into her clothes. It was all I knew, and I trusted them. But not anymore. I found out when I came across a personal ad in the local paper. I don't usually read the news, but I grabbed a stack of papers for a school project, and there it was on top. Missing 14-year-old girl. Date of birth, 4507. Brown hair, green eyes. We haven't given up. We will never forget. Last seen 12 years ago, abducted from Bakersfield Park, pink bow in her hair. Under the ad were two pictures. One of a little girl around 3 years old. The other was a computer-generated image of what she might look like now. The hair was different, but other than that, it felt like looking at myself. My birthday, my description, my picture. I couldn't breathe. I'd always had a strained relationship with the people I lived with, but I tolerated them because I thought they were my family. I was supposed to love them, but now, imagining them taking me from a park, imagining the years my real parents must have spent searching for me, it made my blood boil. I kept flipping through the papers. There it was again, from a month ago, and another one the month before that. Always the same. We will never forget. Are you making a mess in there? Martha called from the living room, her eyes narrowing as she watched me. I did my best to keep my trembling hands under control as I quickly stacked the newspapers. Do you have any baby pictures I could look at? I asked innocently. Martha's face twisted with irritation. Of course, but I don't want you touching anything. You never put things away properly. I mean when I was really little, like 2 years old, I pressed, watching her closely for any sign of hesitation. It was hard to tell, though. She always had that sour expression. I don't think I do, she huffed, turning back to her magazine. There was a flood when you were young. Oh, but you were probably too young to remember. That was all I needed to hear. I went back to my room and dialed the number from the ad. I was crying before the voice on the other end even spoke. Mom? I whispered, barely able to get the words out. Mom, are you there? We didn't call the police. We knew that anyone who could live a lie like that was capable of anything. Instead, we planned to do everything as quietly as possible. I packed a small bag with my favorite clothes and hid it under my bed. I let Tyler tuck me in, holding back the urge to spit in his face when he leaned in to kiss me goodnight. I let Martha watch me through the crack in the door, her pale eyes glowing in the moonlight. I pretended to sleep, my body tense with anticipation. Finally, the time came. I grabbed my bag and slipped out in my pajamas, eager to escape. At the end of the block, there was a car waiting. And for the first time, I felt like I was going home. A woman stepped out of the passenger side, waving to me. It wasn't just any woman, it was my mom. I knew it instantly. I ran toward her before I even realized what I was doing, and she ran to meet me. We collided in an embrace, both of us crying, the words lost between us. She smelled like cinnamon. Then, a man stepped out of the driver's side, but before I could approach him, the deck lights from behind me flared on. Tyler! She's running away. I knew something was wrong. I dove into the car and didn't look back. My real parents tore down the road, and I couldn't help but laugh hysterically. I was finally free.